would also like to thank Ariane for the very lovely lunch that we just had. I would wish now to offer the floor to the Secretary General of ICAO, Dr. Fang Liu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We just had a successful opening this morning, and we are going to continue our plenary this afternoon. Over the next 10 days, you will be exploring how to optimize the evolution of aviation safety and navigation capacity and efficiency. As we work together towards this goal, we must also keep in mind aviation's unique and tremendous potential to improve people's lives. While I'm confident that many of you are aware of the socio-economic contributions our sector makes to national and regional communities, at times that big picture can get lost in the technical details. A key challenge for us in helping states to not only appreciate, but also act on this point that concerns infrastructure underfunding. But please also recall that a great deal can be accomplished when states take the time to meaningfully integrate their aviation investment priorities into their national development strategies. It was for this purpose that the ICAO Secretariat has worked so hard to link your work to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and through this to the socio-economic outcomes being sought under the 2030 Agenda of the United Nations for Sustainable Development. The more clearly governments can appreciate these links, the more willing they will be to invest in aviation projects. This is one of the key messages myself and ICAO's Council President have been delivering during ICAO's global engagements, with special emphasis on how local levels of ICAO compliance play a critical role in how effectively states can optimize their aviation benefits. This point is very clearly underscored by the fact that the state's attainment of no fewer than 15 out of 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is greatly facilitated by the local availability of ICAO-compliant operations. You will be delving into a range of topics during this event, which pertain to many recent air transport innovations, and it's important in this context to recognize how the emergence of new entrants continues to enhance and expand the socio-economic value of aviation. This point is illustrated by the fact that some of the concepts that you will be enabling here through your work on the Global Aviation Safety Plan, GASP, and the Global Air Navigation Plan, GAMP, for example, have the potential to enable new aircraft types to provide internet connectivity to more than 1 billion people in the coming years. Additional capabilities should also be realized relating to the delivery of medicines to inaccessible areas or to reducing emergency response times in the post-disaster scenarios. These are but a few examples of what your work here relates to So please appreciate that life for many will improve on this planet directly because of the decisions and progress you are now posed to undertake together. As we appreciate those impacts, it's important as well, I think, to recognize the role ICAO plays in helping to realize them. It's much more efficient for you and for our sector in general to coordinate and collaborate here collectively that it is to have multiple efforts producing patchwork solutions which can vary from state to state or region to region. And in a related sense, it's critical that ICAO, for its part, is able to demonstrate with confidence that we are setting out a global agenda, which is as practical as it is visionary, and which will make the best use of all available resources. To that point, it is important to note that the outcomes of your conference will provide critical inputs to the development of the 2020 to 2022 ICAO business plan. Through it, we achieve the transparency you deserve with respect to what we spend and what we deliver. And this accountability, in turn, gives the global community the confidence it rightfully demands regarding the purpose and the value of our technical programs. Efficiency and effectiveness will be high on your list of priorities as you assess everything before you over this 10-day event. And they are also essential to how ICAO is organizing and prioritizing its resources. Improving this organization's ability to serve its member states and aviation sector through a result-based management approach has been a key priority of mine and one which is now shared across our secretariat. This speaks to the many resources challenges ICAO is facing with in the current geopolitical environment. But we cannot let this distract us from the continuing need to facilitate and implement your decisions. Simply put, ICAO has had to become quite innovative itself in terms of how we fund and deliver our assistance and leadership in air transport. Many of you may be surprised to learn, for instance, that even some of the more important priorities we are hard at work on must all be paid for through extra budgetary resources we proactively seek out and mobilize. This includes program items such as cybersecurity and cyber resilience, our work to assist with domestic remotely piloted and unmanned aircraft guidance, and other key developments we must accommodate and guide through our global standards. Before concluding today, ladies and gentlemen, I would simply like to highlight that aviation remains the safest way to travel, and that some of the credit for our sector's incredible safety and efficiency performance refers directly to the progress achieved at the past ICAO air navigation conferences. It will now be my great pleasure to pass the floor to Ms. Steen Kramer, the Director of ICAO's Air Navigation Bureau. And in doing so, let me please also wish you all a very successful series of discussions and decisions as you help to shape the coming decade of international civil aviation. I also would like to wish you a wonderful stay in Montreal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Distinguished Council representatives, excellencies, delegates from around the world, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's an honor to have the opportunity to address you and a privilege to serve you in the ICAO Secretariat. I'll begin this presentation by setting the scene at a global level and outlining the challenges that we all face as a whole. I will continue by setting the scene on the conference and further share our latest developments on ICAO's global plans on safety and air navigation capacity and efficiency. And finally, I'll go through the customary approach of describing what this conference is about and ask you those questions that we talked about before lunch for our dialogue later this afternoon. So first, let me start by giving you the global picture. It's our current status, well, the 2018 status of the challenges that we face ahead. What you see here is a snapshot of the high-level statistics of aviation as a whole. The Council, President, Secretary General have mentioned these benefits multiple times in different fora around the world as we have worked to emphasize the importance of aviation for our societies and for our economies. You see the key figures here on the chart. And most recently, this year, we updated to show that there was a 7.1% increase in traffic between 2016 and 2017, and we're on path for another strong growth year this year as well. What this means is that our contribution is clearly being demonstrated by society's involvement here. Here's a detailed look at the contribution of aviation's to global economic prosperity in terms of employment. Over 62 million, almost 63 million directly employed in aviation, not to mention the hundreds of millions who indirectly derive income and benefits, the facilitation of health and humanitarian aid, providing educational opportunities around the world, and improving the quality of life for everyone. This pace is expected to continue as it has in the past. Historically, aviation has not been hindered by crisis, war, or economic recession. Now, while this continued growth is expected and presents tremendous opportunities for all of our stakeholders around the world, it poses a unique challenge. As I spoke of before, how do we ensure that we can support this growth? Will we double the size of the regulatory community around the world as we do it? How can we ensure that we maintain the enviable safety record we enjoy as we expand the number of people working in the industry? This animation of slides simply shows what a doubling of traffic will look like by 2040 as we build out the route networks that exist today and expand them into parts of the world where the economies are rising to the point where aviation is now a part of people's daily lives in a way that it wasn't even 10 years ago. So we face this growth alongside new entrants, the desire to reach an aspirational goal of 0 fatalities in commercial transport, and with global interoperability called for by virtually every industrial stakeholder as they innovate with their own special product. And there are other less technical challenges that we face. There is political conflict. There is difficulty in dealing with information management systems. The same systems which are providing much of this opportunity bring us new risks, which have to be tackled. And then, of course, we have the introduction of new kinds of vehicles, remote piloted aircraft, unmanned aircraft, perhaps autonomous aircraft, and then introduction of commercial space into the same airspace. If you've been to an ICAO conference, you've seen this chart. We start with an analysis of needs, and then we work here to create a set of global plans for safety and air navigation. The plans inform what the Air Navigation Commission and its subordinate bodies work on to create new standards and recommended practices, guidance material. And then the implementation occurs in regional planning groups We do compliance monitoring with the Universal Safety Oversight Audit Program, and then assistance work to make sure that states can increase their capacity, and then we do the whole process all over again. The theme of this conference is developing for implementation, which encompasses not only the need to consider implementation before developing provisions, but also the importance of considering implementation and operational issues when we are developing the technology, the operating concepts and procedures, and the associated roadmaps. The theme emphasizes the importance of concepts for global use, even when created locally. Development of implementation plans regionally, implementation of performance improvements locally based on those agreements, and the specific operational requirements that you have at your location in a cost-effective manner. It addresses all aspects of international traffic flows with a view to enhancing the overall system, now looking at key performance areas, facilitating traffic management by trajectory, supporting a performance-based approach to implementation of operational improvements and basic services. You've got a lot of work ahead of you in the next 9 days to get all of that done. The conference is designed to be your forum for detailed technical discussions. 2 years ago at the Assembly, we had 2/3 of the papers we have at this conference to cover in 2 days. And that's part of why this conference is structured the way it is, to address that need for the states to coalesce around the plans in a more effective way. If we succeed at this, the recommendations from your conference go through the Commission and the Council to be presented at the Assembly for adoption, with a parallel view to looking at what the work program needs in terms of budget and resources and/or resource mobilization requirements, as the Secretary General noted earlier, so that we can actually create a performance plan with a set of deliverables and schedules that can be relied upon by our partners in the states and in the industry. So, in a graphic format, this is the process of moving from this conference through the governance processes in the Commission and the Council to the Assembly. You will recall that last December we had input from the industry advising ICAO and the member states at that symposium on their needs, both in air navigation and in safety performance, and how they would like to be regulated in the introduction of their technologies. Much of that work informs the Secretariat's working papers that were presented here at this conference. Now, there are 8 agenda items. I won't delve into reading each one. You've all had time to prepare for the agenda in the conference. But I would like to remind you that we do have 2 separate committees, but they are interdependent. The Air Transport or Air Navigation Committee begins tomorrow and runs through the 18th of October. And we'll cover agenda items 1 through 3, I believe, this week, and then we'll cover the 4 and 5 next week. Agenda items 6, 7, and 8 on the Safety Committee will be taken between tomorrow and Friday. And the reports from that committee will be read out on Friday afternoon and Saturday, and then they will be collated into the full conference report on the closing day on the 19th of October. With the involvement of multiple stakeholders comes alignment towards specific priorities. And that's where the global plans are designed to fit in. Our global plans are policy documents which provide strategic direction for addressing all of the global challenges that we face. The 39th Assembly in 2016 endorsed the current versions of the GASP and the GAMP, providing the aviation community with a unified vision for the way forward on both plans. The GAMP drives the evolution of global air navigation system to meet the expectations of the community and support the optimum allocation of available resources. Safety is paramount within these community expectations, and that is why the GASP sets forth the safety strategy in support of the prioritization and continuous improvement of aviation safety. They are different in nature because they speak to different constituencies, but they have a common mandatory outcome of delivering safety no matter what the risks are that we identify and introduce with new technology and new procedures. And that's why they're different. The Air Navigation Plan is considered to some degree an optional plan. Unless you have a need to implement the technologies and the procedures because of the complexity or volume of traffic, you don't have to implement all of the technologies in the GAMP or the ASBUs. But on the safety side, we're not permissive. The standards in the safety side of the plan are required to be implemented by any state that engages in an activity covered by those standards. But they share a common final goal: strategic alignment with the UN Strategic Development Goals, 17 of which are outlined in the UN, 15 of which are touched in some way by aviation. And so we see this as a true driver of progress for states that are trying to progress their social and economic capabilities in the areas where they are underdeveloped or underserved by other modes of transport, particularly, or where they do not yet have the market connectivity that other states might enjoy. They're based on a common vision, and each presents their own vision as it relates to safety and air navigation. They do have a common structure and a driving strategy based on performance. And they both share a structure based on implementation of the global strategy, adopted at the regional and at the national level for your specific needs. And that is why they're complementary. It has been difficult to integrate the plans because, for now, they do read differently. But as we digitize the components of the two plans, they will become more and more interconnected and will reflect more of what you need when you're looking to decide what your priorities are in your safety investments or in your capacity and efficiency investments. It's also important to talk about the USOP and the importance of continuous monitoring and what that has brought to the overall community. There are a number of factors which have delivered the safety outcomes that we have today in aviation. Much of that comes from the introduction of safety management into the management principles of the industry itself. Not because of a regulator telling the industry to do it, but because it simply makes good business sense to operate a safe airline. And so for the last 20 years, you could go on the market and find a CEO or a COO for an airline who has graduated from a program which teaches safety management as an integral part of their airline management responsibility. And that mirrors the introduction of safety management in many of the states over the past 15 years, which recognize those programs and depend upon them. So the industry has invested and changed and has become more professional in its management, alongside the introduction of recognition of safety management and encouragement of safety management by the states through SMS and now the state safety programs. So we're working together to deliver these improvements. This is a complicated slide that I don't have notes for. So we're aimed at technical alignment in a national air navigation plan, leading to a national aviation safety plan, which incorporates recognition of the risks and mitigation of the risks associated with that plan, and then developing a post-implementation review and assessment of the performance of that system, both in the safety arena and also now in the results assessment for the key performance areas of an air navigation plan. Up until now, that's been very difficult to achieve in the global context of measuring air navigation performance across ANSPs. But that is becoming more and more possible as we gain access to big data and global data and use that information in ways that can help us to optimize our services in the airspaces that we use. So since the last assembly and the last large conference, which was the High-Level Safety Conference in 2015, what's happened? That's a good question. The 300 papers indicate that a lot is underway, but I just want to do a quick recap here. We're aiming to enable 2 to 3 times the traffic over the next 15 to 20 years, while reducing emissions by half in the commercial air transport industry over the next 30 years. We're going to do it with the same level of safety that we have today. So we're aiming to roll out state safety programs and safety management audit programs through our USOP program beginning at the end of next year, with standards that were put in place with a 3.5-year implementation planning timeline, and that we're underway with now. We have been working on the design of a concept which you'll see in the papers and in the presentations called the Trust Framework, which essentially allows us to multiply the number of trusted and authenticated connections that we can provide to the industry in a manner that assures safety and the integrity of data, and also works with the cybersecurity community to ensure that that data is protected in the right way. This will be the framework developing digital approval records, system-wide information management, aeronautical information management, true global ATFM multinodal, improved ATC data communications, remote command and control of UAVs and RPAS, perhaps autonomous operations, neural networks with machine learning and artificial intelligence applied in aviation, advances in additive manufacturing, which are garnering many of the environmental improvements that we're seeing today, as well as the introduction of non-accredited products that become permitted to join our approved data networks because they go through an accreditation and approval process that's centered within the Directors General of Civil Aviation. We've been working on the next generation of aviation professionals program. Soon we'll hold our second summit for the NGAP program in Shenzhen, China. This program has been underway for several years, started in 2009, I think, in the ICAO timeframe, as a way for us to organize educational institutions who were looking to improve the delivery of technical learning to students, but also to attract young individuals into the aviation community so that they could come into this industry and assist us. Over the next 25 years, there's a requirement for 500,000 plus commercial airline pilots. Along with all of those pilots, we need cabin crew, we need air traffic controllers, engineers, airport workers, and we'll need cybersecurity experts and artificial intelligence experts. The demand is amazing. And so we really need to work to make sure we get our share of the bright talent. And what we came to understand at ICAO is by participating with these education institutions, we actually gain access to this bright infrastructure of young people who have new ideas that, for me as a 37-year profession, I wish I was 37 years old, 37-year professional, I've stopped saying this is possible because I've seen all the times when it's not. I've been conditioned to say, well, that's going to be hard to do. But the young adults coming into this industry are not conditioned this way. They have a belief in the power of innovation if it's organized correctly. They've seen it in their lives. And we have an opportunity to tap that. And so at ICAO, we're using our relationships to ask hard questions to the universities and have them give us answers. They're not always ready for production or fit for purpose, but they're designed to stimulate our conversation here in this room and in the panels of the Commission and out in the regions where we're working with you. One of our partners in that program, in fact, has worked a virtual reality booth in the corner. So during one of the breaks, if you see a chance to go out and look at the NGAP booth for virtual reality, they'll appreciate some attention from you and showing you some of the things that are possible in that regard. The Global Aviation Safety Oversight System will be a topic, I think, of keen discussion later this week in Committee B. It's designed to leverage partnerships and collaboration between states and the regional safety oversight organizations in ways that bring new power to delivering competence and technical proficiency to states that may not have it today and desire it. And to do it in a way that ICAO will recognize that relationship as we go through and look at them for their effective implementation. It doesn't relieve them of their responsibility to regulate their industry themselves, but it provides them a way to work with a partner effectively in a way that maintains safety and makes it clear what the delineation of responsibility is. So we're looking forward to the dialogue this week to progress that work, because we believe doubling of traffic and volume cannot be accompanied by doubling the size of the regulatory community. It requires smarter deployment of our capabilities around the world and partnering so that we can deliver safety oversight in new, more effective ways. We worked on cargo safety over the last 2 years, and particularly the concern around the carriage of lithium ion and lithium metal batteries in cargo aircraft and in passenger aircraft. And we're working now with the SAE and others to develop safe packaging standards so that we can resume the transport of those batteries in the cargo hold, but without the risk of an inadvertent fire that might cause the loss of life in the hold. It's very detailed technical work, but we're not the experts. The people in the technical specifications community are the experts, and I'll come back and talk about that a little more later. We're working to try and begin with the end in mind. Working with the Commission, we're talking through how to build standards that are implementation ready, not standards that need design work after they're produced. We're working to plan rollouts across regions and states that are part of a schedule that's incorporated into the regional planning groups, and then to measure and report on the uptake and the performance of those implementations as they occur. This will occur principally through the planning and implementation regional groups, the regional aviation safety groups. Some of us have proposed merging those two groups. Many of us have said they don't want to. But I think it's clear that the two groups have to interact and connect, just like we connect the GASP and the GAMP together. We've tried to work on digitizing and making the GAMP and the GASP live, with updates in collaboration with the regional developments that are occurring in your states and in your own regions, with a renewed emphasis on industry stakeholder input and involvement, and promoting the idea that collaborative decision-making in all aspects of how our industry progresses is essential to a truly quality product. Industrial actions are a fact of our lives because we have people who use our procedures and our policies and our technologies, but that does not resolve us or absolve us of the responsibility to bring those people to the table and have them work through the hard questions of how their work is accomplished in these complex systems. Performance measurements for ATM are part of the new proposals. Basic building blocks for the different states around the world that have different needs for ATM, and then contextual safety performance measures. So we're talking about progressing past the arbitrary 60% effective implementation threshold to tailoring requirements for states around their own needs. So it's some pretty in-depth work that has been accomplished by panels, by working groups, and by many of the regional groups to move us to the papers that are being presented to you during this conference. Got to go back. Okay. So this is a 2-week conference. It runs by rules that were decided by the council, and they date from 1983. I will admit they did not have internet in those rules. So there have been some changes in the way the building and the organization accommodates that. I'm actually impressed that our network has not crashed with 1,000 people and probably 1,500 devices in the room. With the current trend in working paper numbers, currently we have 300 planned for a 2-week meeting. It's an enormous commitment for you to come here for 2 weeks. And we're interested in finding your feedback this afternoon on how we should think about evolving the system with a balance between the burden and wanting to have the right level of transparency and involvement so that people see the process and can participate in it. Now, a little fun. We hope it's going to work. Some of you have seen this before. Do we have sound, Alexis?
And that landing burn has started.
Both boosters looking to be on track towards their respective landing zones.
Landing legs have started. Side boosters landing legs have deployed.
And the Falcons have landed. Turn your fire! Oh my God. Oh my God.
15 seconds before those boosters landed, they were supersonic. There wasn't a remote pilot. There wasn't anybody on board. They wouldn't have survived. Artificial intelligence, neural net learning, it's being deployed by the industry as we speak. And that's a simple example. It's not a simple example. That's rocket science. But it's an example of what's coming. And every week at ICAO, we see somebody with something new that they're wanting to introduce in an international, global way. And they're asking us, how can we do that? How can we get our product deployed globally? So we described to them the process of working through their own regulatory authority, developing their own standards locally, and then trying to globalize that product after the fact. It's a pretty daunting process. We don't have a technology problem in air traffic management, and particularly in ATFM. If we do now, we won't in the next 3 years. Airport and airport surveillance will soon be a commodity. The real-time position of every IFR-capable vehicle in the world could probably be maintained in a common data platform, even if the aircraft are parked in the hangar. The intent can be derived from a combination of the flight plan, the flight management system readings, and the weather and wind information for the entire planet can be retrieved, if not instantaneously, within a few seconds from a variety of sources. The forecasts for the entire planet can be made available in real time. And the computing power necessary to evaluate all of this information and turn it into an actionable plan is available off the shelf today. Does anyone in this audience use a direction finding system for driving on the roads? These systems are supporting hundreds of millions of vehicles and roadways and government authorities. And if you've driven in Montreal, you know that the roads are closing and opening here by the minute. And they predict it and reroute the traffic. It's not always perfect, I'll grant that. It's not up to the level that I would approve it for safety of flight yet, because they don't have that requirement. They have a requirement for it to be just good enough to be of benefit and more value than it is, the frustration of it sometimes being wrong. Artificial intelligence is on the cusp of solving complex challenges much more effectively than humans can. And that's been shown in prototypes of various kinds around the world. Some of you may have heard about AlphaGo, defeating the world's Go champions, and now becoming essentially capable of multiple thread Go transactions. So imagine if artificial intelligence manufacturers or designers decide that they want to tackle the ATFM problem. And they're not aviation people. They come at it from a different perspective on solving the problem. They want to understand what the definition of victory is, if they were to call it a game. Let's call them fluid flow for a minute. What does victory in the ATFM world look like? Is it predictability, on-time performance, fuel savings, optimization of capacity on a route or on an airport surface? They'd want to know. They'd want to know what the best moves are to achieve that in day-to-day operations. To do that, they'd need to know the rules. That's why they'd come here. They can use that information from all the places I mentioned before: surveillance, NOTAMs, airspace state information, the weather. What about the specific needs of the operator for a specific flight? Once they have all of that, they know how to move the pieces on the board. So how would they move those pieces? They can't touch an airplane directly, or can they? Do they work through the air traffic controller? A few years ago, a company in the United States started selling a service where they monitored all the flights in the United States, and if they could predict that your flight would save 2 minutes, they would send you a message on your ACARS unit telling you to ask the controller for a direct flight to a fix. And you'd ask, and you'd get it, because they already knew there was no traffic that would stop you from getting that routing. Air traffic control wasn't even aware that this optimization was occurring because somebody was applying the technology. The engineers in fluid flow, this designer would ask if that's legal in the United States. They might find that a 2-minute savings puts a pilot in conflict on a time over fix a little later in the flight. They'd want to know if the capacity of a particular piece of airspace could be modeled, and if they could assume operations at a specific separation standard, or would they have to add a buffer of 10 or 20 or 30% to their model. They would assume that their grasp of the problems would save users enough money so that they would buy their technology. But could they convince humans to work with their system so that they could achieve these benefits and declare victory? Before we get to that point, we have to do a better job of teaching people how to interact with one another, nonetheless with computers, to achieve results. It's our equivalent of teaching people how to become champion Go players to interact in the ATM system. They also need to know the rules of engagement. And that's one of the hardest things to teach today as technology and systems evolve. We have a lot of conflicting assumptions in different airspaces, and that's what the GAMP and the ASBOs are designed to help us start to reduce. So we need action by states. They need to be able to collectively comprehend and define the problem. They need to create new policies and rules for all the stakeholders that sustain the high level of safety that we currently enjoy, that allow for new entrants, that emphasize performance outcomes that can be defined and ultimately measured in a fair, transparent way globally. That's what your proposed plans are seeking to do. We believe ICAO holds a central role in helping to define the terms of reference. Terminologies and definitions are our first product. We build on this with the global plans, and we help develop procedures for humans and machines that can be universally understood. And we do that now in close cooperation with the industry and with the stakeholders, pilots, controllers, and now flow managers. And we do it so that they can interact with one another with confidence in their role. Just as important, we believe that the states need to develop common methods and safety oversight across their entire service and adjacent services, because work to achieve safety approvals is a large part of the cost of these efforts. ICAO can help states with rolling out training on this, but only to a certain extent. And we need to understand where the states would pick that up and carry it into the regions or into the industry itself. All of this interconnectivity is why we believe the trust framework is so important for future development and why we're looking forward to the conversation next week in Committee A. The benefits need to be accrued for all stakeholders for any of these changes to be truly successful. All of us have a story about some unique or potential benefit that never quite made it into the system for one reason or another. And one of the reasons for the questions we're posing this afternoon is to ask you to think with us about the hard questions of how we need to refine our process to reduce the incidences where progress can't be made. And as we've discussed this morning, we're working to connect the plans and to see what's coming at us in the near future. And the GAMP has a hook for artificial intelligence and machine learning in the requirements to do automation as part of the air navigation solutions. Now, while we're working on all this gee whiz stuff, it's the hard work of implementation, planning, and engagement that also needs to be focused on in the plans. We believe that the solutions for virtually any problem any of us has in this room have been thought through at one time or another by a pilot or a controller or an engineer. And if we could get their solutions properly vetted through safety management principles, we can progress that work in ways that we have been unable to in the past and measure the outcomes in the global reporting processes, in local reporting processes, both on the safety side and in the air navigation side of the business. An aviation system block upgrade is defined to start with a problem statement. What's the problem to solve? Why is the proposed solution the best solution? Have you worked with all of the stakeholders involved to know that it is implementable in an airspace or in a control room or on a flight deck or in the technology? How will you have it approved? Can you get the airframe approved, the flight ops manual approved, and the air traffic control procedure approved so that you can use it in a collaborative way to save the time or money that you want? If you can do all of those things and you still have a positive business case, it's ready to be thought about for global adoption. And that's what we seek, is candidates that can be brought forward to ICAO in a way that has that level of maturity. Now, we're looking for candidates, and we've asked several states around the world to give us possible opportunities. And last year, the authorities in China brought us a project. They said, we want you to make a smartphone license for pilots. And then they showed me they had 40,000 pilots using their license on their smartphones with their ratings, their most recent criteria for medical and check, translated in 6 languages, and available for essentially any international inspector to utilize to look at their credentials. But how do you validate that? How does any inspector anywhere else in the world know that that's a real certificate? And that's something that we're working with China on to make sure that we have proposals ready. And we're going to be bringing a proposal to the Air Navigation Commission, which would look at this material with the eye towards digitizing pilot licenses. Much of this work will progress through what we call technical standards organizations or bodies that ICAO has got a relationship with. EuroK in Europe, RTCA in the United States, SAE Aerospace, the AEEC, and now there are others who are interested in partnering because they see the value of having their technical work aligned with these global objectives. And we would expect that the technical work, which previously you might have found in Annex 10, will migrate out into these organizations' technical specifications, and we will refer to them. And we now have agreements with the 4 that I just mentioned so that they can be offered to states free of charge as a resource as part of that reference when ICAO references their standards. in the ICAO Library of Annexes. We're also working on improving the implementation process. Instead of just taking a standard and putting it on a shelf, we now start to work on an implementation campaign. And we work through guidance on how it can be implemented, guidance on how it can be regulated and overseen, and then to develop the training programs for all of the stakeholders in the various regions as they roll it out. So it's a lot of activity. But is it the right activity? Is it enough activity? Do you have a different proposal? That's what the questions are aimed to get us into a conversation around, and to see if we can't move the state of the art of regulatory development and deployment to a new level that will keep up with the emerging industry and do it in a way that continues to deliver the safe outcomes that we enjoy while we grow our business. I thank you all very much for your attention, and we're looking forward to the dialogue. After the break, I'll return the microphone to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Creamer. It was a very interesting presentation on what has taken place in the last number of years at ICAO and what we might need to think about collectively for the future. Now I would like to announce that there will be another 25-minute refreshment break, which is sponsored by ASBU for the Future, served outside in the foyer. And I would like to invite you to come back in 25 minutes so that we can start at 3:30 promptly to discuss these interesting questions about the future direction that we need to go in. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.